Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. Lila's life had been nothing but an endless cycle of pain, suffering, and cruelty. From the moment her father had passed away, leaving her at the mercy of her wicked stepmother and equally heartless step-siblings, who had treated her not as family, but as an unwanted servant, forcing her to bear the weight of their every demand, while robbing her of the love and security she had once known in her father's presence. At just 25, she had never truly lived, only survived, existing in a house that once held warm memories, but had since turned into her personal prison, where she was forced to cook, clean, and endure relentless humiliation without a single moment of respite. From the break of dawn, her day began with the piercing voice of her stepmother, Margot, who would storm into her tiny, windowless storage room, kicking over the thin, ragged blanket she used to cover herself at night, and yanking her up by the arm, barking orders as if she were nothing more than a lifeless object to command, a mere tool to serve their needs. "Lazy girl, do you think this house will clean itself?" Margot would sneer, her voice laced with disdain, eyes burning with an inexplicable hatred, as though Lila's very existence was an offense. "Get up and make breakfast before I throw you out onto the streets where you belong." The threats no longer fazed Lila because she knew they were empty. Margot would never truly throw her out, not because she cared, but because she enjoyed having someone to torment, someone to crush beneath her feet whenever she pleased. And so, without protest, without allowing herself the luxury of dreaming of rebellion, Lila would drag her weary body from the cold floor, forcing her legs to move despite the hunger gnawing at her stomach, the fatigue that never left her bones, and the heaviness of a heart that had long since been shattered beyond repair. And once the family was seated at the grand dining table, laughing and chatting as they indulged in the feast she had painstakingly prepared, Lila would stand silently in the background, stomach rumbling in protest, forced to watch them eat, while knowing that, once again, there would be nothing left for her. Her stepbrother, Ethan, took particular pleasure in tormenting her, often calling her over just to make her believe he was about to give her a piece of food before shoving it into his mouth with a smirk, laughing as she swallowed her pride and turned away, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her pain. Oh, poor Lila, her stepsister, Sophie, would mock with a condescending pout. "If only you weren't so useless, maybe someone would actually care about you." The words stung, not because they were true, but because Lila had once foolishly believed that if she tried hard enough, if she was obedient and kind, they would love her, that maybe, just maybe, they would see her worth and treat her as family. But years of cruelty had long since shattered that hope, replacing it with the cold realization that to them, she would never be anything more than an inconvenience, a punching bag for their frustrations, a presence they tolerated only because she was useful. And yet, despite everything, despite the suffering, despite the injustice, Lila refused to let them break her completely. Deep within her heart, buried beneath the scars of years of abuse, she held on to the tiniest sliver of hope that one day, somehow, she would escape this nightmare, that she would find a place where she was not merely tolerated, but truly wanted, truly loved. At night, as she lay curled up on the cold, hard floor of the cramped storage room they called her bedroom, she would stare at the cracked ceiling, imagining a different life, a life where she was free, where she could walk without fear, smile without restraint, love without hesitation. But reality was unforgiving, and each morning she was reminded that she was still trapped in this cruel existence, still bound to a fate that seemed inescapable. The bruises on her arms, the calluses on her hands, the empty ache in her stomach, all reminders that she was nothing more than a servant in her own home, a prisoner in a place where she should have been cherished. Even as she scrubbed the floors until her hands bled, even as she endured the sting of Margot's harsh words, even as she watched Ethan and Sophie flaunt the luxuries that should have rightfully been hers, Lila refused to let the darkness consume her completely. She would endure, she would survive, because she knew, no matter how hopeless things seemed now, her story was not meant to end in suffering. There had to be more waiting for her beyond these walls, beyond this pain, beyond this cruel, unloving house. But when and how would her escape come? For now, all she could do was wait and endure, praying that someday, somehow, her life would finally change. That night was colder than usual, the chilling wind howling through the cracks of the old mansion, Lila had long called home, but it was not the biting cold that sent shivers down her spine. It was the strange, unsettling silence that had settled over the house, an eerie quiet that made her stomach twist with an unexplainable sense of dread. She had learned long ago that peace in this house was often a warning, a sign of something sinister lurking just beneath the surface. And as she scrubbed the kitchen floor, her fingers numb from exhaustion, she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. It wasn't long before her fears were confirmed. The sound of heels clicking against the marble floor made her freeze, and when she turned her head, she found herself face to face with Margot, whose expression was more smug than usual. Her painted lips curved into a smile that sent a wave of nausea through Lila's already weak body. "Get up," Margot commanded, her voice cold, eyes gleaming with something dark, something Lila couldn't quite place. She hesitated for only a second before obeying, rising to her feet, wiping her damp hands on the ragged dress she wore, heart hammering violently against her ribcage as she waited for whatever cruel punishment Margot had planned this time. But nothing could have prepared her for the words that followed. "Pack your things," Margot said, amusement lacing her tone. "You're leaving." The words didn't make sense at first. Leaving? That couldn't be possible. Lila had nowhere to go, no one waiting for her beyond the confines of this house. The only escape she had ever dared to dream of was one she could create for herself. Not one Margot would willingly grant. "What?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper, fear coiling in her gut. Margot clicked her tongue in irritation before stepping closer, gripping Lila's chin with sharp, manicured nails, forcing her to look up. "Don't make me repeat myself, girl," she sneered. "You should be grateful. I finally found someone willing to take you off my hands. Do you have any idea how worthless you are? No man in their right mind would ever want a pathetic little servant like you. But lucky for you, someone does." The pit in Lila's stomach deepened, her mind racing with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Had she been sold into servitude elsewhere? Was she being cast out into the streets to fend for herself? But before she could voice her concerns, a knock echoed through the house, sharp and authoritative, making her blood run cold. Margot smirked, releasing Lila's face as she turned toward the door, her movements unhurried, almost leisurely, as if she were about to welcome an esteemed guest rather than seal her stepdaughter's fate. Lila wanted to run, wanted to scream, but her legs felt like they had been filled with lead, her body frozen in place as the heavy wooden door creaked open, revealing a man whose mere presence sucked the air from the room. Victor Stone, the name alone was enough to send fear through anyone who had ever heard of him, and Lila had heard plenty. He was a man of power, wealth, and ruthlessness, a billionaire whose name carried both respect and terror, a man whose business empire was built on the broken backs of those foolish enough to cross him. He was cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of mercy. And now, somehow, for some unimaginable reason, he was here for her. Victor stood tall, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, his tailored black suit a stark contrast against the dim lighting of the mansion, his sharp, chiseled features unreadable as his icy gaze landed on Lila. His presence alone was suffocating, an unshakable force that demanded attention, that commanded obedience without a single word. Margot greeted him with a sickeningly sweet smile, the kind she reserved for wealthy men who could serve her interests. "Mr. Stone," she purred, stepping aside. "Everything is ready." Lila barely had time to process what was happening before two of Victor's men entered the house. Towering figures dressed in black, their expressions void of emotion as they moved toward her with the efficiency of men who had done this countless times before. Panic surged through her veins, her body finally responding as she stumbled backward, heart slamming against her ribs as reality set in. She had been sold, like property, like an object to be traded for wealth. "No," she gasped, shaking her head in disbelief. "You can't do this." But her protests only seemed to amuse Margot, who merely laughed, crossing her arms as she watched the scene unfold with evident satisfaction. "Oh, but I can," she mused. "Do you really think you had a choice, Lila? You belong to me, and now you belong to Mr. Stone." The words sent a violent shudder through Lila's body. Her stepmother had never seen her as family, but to hear her say it so blatantly, to confirm what Lila had long suspected, was like a dagger straight to the heart. She turned to Victor, desperation in her eyes, hoping, praying that there was some sort of mistake, that he would change his mind, that he would see her as nothing more than a burden and walk away. But Victor's expression remained impassive, unreadable, as if her suffering was nothing more than an inconvenience, an afterthought. "We're leaving," he stated, his voice deep, authoritative, leaving no room for argument. And just like that, her fate was sealed. The two men reached for her, their grips firm but not cruel, though it didn't matter. She thrashed against them, struggling with every ounce of strength she had, tears spilling down her cheeks as she pleaded, begged, but it was useless. "Please," she sobbed. "I don't want to go." Margot merely watched, unimpressed, rolling her eyes at Lila's desperation. "Enough of this nonsense," she snapped. "You should be thanking me. Do you have any idea how much money Mr. Stone paid for you? You're finally worth something." The humiliation, the betrayal, the sheer helplessness of it all crushed Lila's spirit, but she had no time to dwell on it before she was being dragged toward the door, her mind screaming for an escape that didn't exist. As she was pulled past the threshold, the last thing she saw was Margot's smug face, Ethan and Sophie standing behind her with amused expressions, not a single trace of remorse in their eyes. And then the door slammed shut behind her, severing her from the only life she had ever known, no matter how cruel it had been. The night air was frigid, the sleek black car waiting at the curb reflecting the dim glow of the streetlights, its presence looming like a final nail in the coffin of her freedom. Victor walked ahead, unconcerned, his movements effortless as he slid into the back seat, not once looking back at the girl who had just been torn from her home against her will. The men forced her forward, opening the car door before pushing her inside, the scent of leather and power overwhelming her senses as she landed on the seat opposite the billionaire who now owned her. The door shut, the locks clicked into place, and as the car pulled away from the house, from everything she had ever known, Lila realized with a horrifying certainty her life was no longer her own. The car ride was silent, the hum of the engine the only sound filling the air, but inside, the tension was thick, suffocating, stretching across the space between Lila and Victor like an invisible thread waiting to snap. Lila sat stiffly, her hands clenched in her lap, her entire body trembling from the events of the night, from the overwhelming realization that she was no longer free, that she had been taken away from her home, not that it had ever been a home to belong to a man she had never met before, a man whose reputation alone sent fear coursing through her veins. But as terrified as she was, she refused to break, refused to let Margot win by cowering in fear. Instead, she kept her gaze down, refusing to meet the eyes of the man who had just purchased her like a possession. But Victor was watching her. No, not just watching, studying her, analyzing her with the precision of a man who was rarely surprised by anything in life. And yet, here he was, completely stunned, utterly thrown off by the sight of the woman sitting across from him. He had expected just another woman, another desperate soul looking for an escape, another beauty who had been used and discarded by the world. But Lila was none of those things. She was breathtaking, ethereal, an angel sitting in his car, wrapped in a dress that barely fit her frame, her smooth brown skin glowing under the dim light, her full lips pressed together in defiance, her dark, innocent eyes filled with a pain so deep, so raw, that it made something inside him shift, something unfamiliar, something dangerous. He had met countless women, had been surrounded by beauty all his life, but none had ever captivated him like this. None had ever made his breath hitch the way she just had. He leaned back against the leather seat, his piercing gaze never leaving her, his mind racing with questions, with an unexplainable need to know everything about her, to understand why she looked at the world with such guarded sorrow, why she carried herself like someone who had been broken too many times, but refused to fall apart. And then, as he continued to watch her, his sharp eyes picking up on every small detail, the way her fingers trembled ever so slightly, the way she flinched when the car hit a small bump, the way she refused to meet his gaze, he noticed something that made his entire body still. Purity, innocence, a kind of untouched fragility that didn't belong in this world, especially not in his world. His chest tightened, his jaw clenching as realization sank in, as the weight of what he had just acquired settled in his mind. She was a virgin, at 25. The shock of it sent an unfamiliar jolt through him, a strange mix of emotions he wasn't used to feeling. He had seen it all, had been with women who knew how to play the game, who knew what men like him wanted, but Lila, she was untouched, untainted by the sins of the world, and that realization alone made something dark and possessive stir deep within him. His fingers tapped against his knee, his mind calculating, wondering if she had been hiding it, if she had been saving herself for someone, if she had been protecting herself from the cruelty of men, or if the cruelty she had endured had simply never allowed her the chance to know love, to know intimacy, to know the kind of passion he had given so many others. His curiosity deepened, his need to know more growing with every passing second. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice smooth yet firm, carrying the weight of authority that few dared to challenge. Lila stiffened but didn't obey, her eyes remaining locked on her lap, her body tense as if preparing for whatever cruelty he was about to unleash. Victor narrowed his eyes, the sharpness of her defiance intriguing him. Most women fell to their knees the second he spoke, desperate to please, desperate to be in his presence. But she was different, and he wanted to know why. I said, "Look at me." This time, his voice was lower, rougher, carrying a dangerous edge that sent a shiver down Lila's spine. Slowly, hesitantly, she lifted her gaze, her dark eyes finally meeting his, and in that moment, Victor felt something shift, something irreversible. Up close, she was even more stunning than he had realized. Her eyes held secrets, held pain, held a story he suddenly needed to hear. "Tell me," he murmured, his gaze never wavering. "Who did this to you?" Lila frowned, confusion flickering across her delicate features. "Did what?" Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but it carried weight, carried strength beneath the fear. Victor tilted his head, his sharp blue eyes searching hers, reading her like an open book. "Who took everything from you?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost gentle. Lila's breath hitched, her fingers clenching the fabric of her dress as emotions she had buried for years threatened to surface. No one had ever asked her that before. No one had ever cared to. For years, she had been invisible, a shadow in her own life, a servant in her own home. She had endured every insult, every slap, every cruel word, and yet she had never once been asked about her pain, never once been given a moment to breathe, to speak, to be heard. And now, here was the most powerful man in the country, a man who could have anything, anyone, sitting across from her, demanding to know her story. She swallowed hard, her throat dry, her heart pounding. "My stepmother," she finally whispered, the words tasting bitter on her tongue, "and my step-siblings." Victor's expression darkened, his jaw tightening, his fingers flexing against his knee. He had suspected as much, but hearing it from her lips, seeing the way her body reacted to the mere mention of them, ignited something dangerous inside him. He hated cruelty, hated the idea of a woman being mistreated, being used, being discarded. And now, knowing that this angel, this untouched beauty, had suffered at the hands of the very people who should have protected her, made his blood boil. "Tell me everything," he demanded, his voice like steel. Lila hesitated, her instinct screaming at her to stay silent, to keep her pain to herself, to never let anyone close enough to see her scars. But as she looked into Victor's eyes, as she saw the intensity there, the silent promise that he wouldn't let this go, she realized that, for the first time in her life, she wasn't being ignored, she was being seen. And so, with a shaky breath, she told him. She told him about the nights spent scrubbing floors until her fingers bled, about the days spent hungry because Margot refused to feed her, about the insults, the punishments, the isolation, the constant reminder that she was unwanted, unloved, undeserving of kindness. She told him about the stolen dreams, the sleepless nights, the desperate prayers whispered into the darkness. And as she spoke, Victor listened not out of pity, not out of curiosity, but out of something far deeper, something far more dangerous. Because as she poured her soul out to him, as she laid bare every wound, every scar, every heartbreak, Victor Stone, the man known for his cold heart and ruthless ways, made a decision. Lila was his now, and he was never letting her go. The moment Lila's lips parted to speak, it felt as if time itself had frozen. The weight of years of suffering, of pain buried so deep it had nearly become a part of her, finally pushed its way to the surface, and she could no longer hold it back. Sitting across from Victor in the dimly lit luxury of his mansion, she felt small, insignificant, yet, for the first time in her life, she felt like someone wanted to hear her, like someone actually cared about the story that had been locked away inside her fragile heart. Her voice trembled as she spoke, her hands clenching the fabric of her dress, her nails digging into her palms, as if to anchor herself, as if to stop herself from breaking apart entirely. "It started when my father died," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. But to Victor, it was the loudest sound in the world. His sharp, piercing gaze never wavered from her, his entire body frozen in silent fury as he listened, as he absorbed every single word, every single detail of the nightmare she had endured. "I was just a little girl," she continued, her eyes dark pools of sorrow, her beautiful brown skin glowing under the golden light, a stark contrast to the pain she was reliving. "He was my whole world. He loved me more than anything. He used to tell me I was his little princess, that he would always protect me. But then he was gone just like that. One day, he left for work, and he never came back." Her voice hitched, the memory too raw, too painful, and for a moment she struggled to breathe, struggled to continue. Victor clenched his fists, his jaw tightened, his entire being radiating fury, but he stayed silent, letting her continue at her own pace, knowing that this was the first time she had ever been given the chance to speak her truth. "After he died," she continued, blinking back the tears that threatened to spill, "everything changed. Margot, she didn't even pretend to care anymore. It was as if the moment he was gone, I stopped existing as a person. She didn't even let me grieve. The very next day, she took everything that belonged to my father, everything he had ever given me, everything that reminded me of him. She sold his things, threw away his pictures, erased him from the house as if he had never even lived there. And then she turned to me and she said, 'You are nothing in this house. You have nothing. You are nothing.' And from that day on, she made sure I never forgot it." A single tear slipped down Lila's cheek, but she didn't bother to wipe it away. She had spent too many years swallowing her pain, pretending she was strong enough to carry it alone. But now, in the presence of the most powerful man in the country, a man who could destroy lives with a single command, she let herself be vulnerable, let herself finally say the words she had buried so deep. "At first it was just small things," she whispered, her voice trembling. "She would make me clean the house, cook for her and Ethan and Sophie. I thought maybe if I worked hard enough, maybe if I proved I was useful, she would let me stay. She would at least let me live. But I was wrong. Nothing I did was ever enough. If I didn't clean fast enough, I was punished. If I didn't cook perfectly, I was punished. If I even breathed the wrong way, I was punished. And when she got tired of punishing me herself, she let Ethan and Sophie do it." Lila choked on the words, the memories flashing before her eyes like a never-ending nightmare. "They would laugh at me, call me names, push me, hit me, humiliate me. They would spill food on the floor on purpose, just to watch me get on my hands and knees to clean it up. They would take my clothes, my shoes, my books, anything that was mine, anything that gave me even the smallest bit of comfort, they took it away. And when I cried, they would say I was weak, that I was pathetic, that no one would ever love someone like me." The pain in her voice was unbearable, like shattered glass cutting through the air, and Victor felt something inside him snap. His hands curled into tight fists, his nails digging into his palms so hard he nearly drew blood, his entire body trembling with uncontainable rage. He wanted to kill them, all of them, every single person who had ever laid a hand on her, every single person who had ever made her feel worthless. He wanted to erase them from existence, to make them suffer 1,000 times over for every tear she had shed, for every moment of pain they had inflicted on her. But he stayed silent, forcing himself to listen, forcing himself to let her speak, because he knew this wasn't just about revenge. This was about her, about the years of suffering she had endured alone. And right now, she needed to be heard more than anything. "I tried to leave once," Lila whispered, her voice barely audible, her body trembling as she relived the moment that had nearly broken her completely. "I thought if I could just get away, if I could just run far enough, maybe I could have a life of my own. So one night, when they were asleep, I packed a small bag, took whatever little money I had saved from doing chores for the neighbors, and I ran. I ran as fast as I could, as far as I could. I didn't know where I was going, I didn't care, I just wanted to be free." She let out a bitter laugh, one filled with so much pain it made Victor's chest ache. "But I was stupid. I thought I was fast, but they were faster. They found me before I even made it out of town. Margot was waiting for me when they dragged me back home. She didn't say a word, she just smiled. And then she took everything from me. She locked me in the basement for 3 days, no food, no water, no light, just darkness. Just silence, just nothing. Lila closed her eyes, as if trying to push away the memory, as if trying to erase the horror of those days from her mind. But it was impossible. It was burned into her soul, a scar that would never fade. When she finally let me out, she continued, her voice hollow, empty. She told me, "You are mine. You will never escape me. No one will ever save you. No one will ever love you. You are nothing." A heavy silence filled the room, the weight of her words settling like a storm between them. And then, slowly, she lifted her gaze, her dark, pain-filled eyes meeting Victor's. "And for years," she whispered, "I believed her." Victor couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. All he could do was stare at the woman in front of him, the woman who had been through hell and still managed to survive, the woman who had been broken 1,000 times but still found the strength to keep going. And in that moment, he made a silent vow. He would protect her, no matter what it took, no matter what he had to do. She was his now, and no one would ever hurt her again. The moment Victor Stone uttered those words, the entire world seemed to shift beneath Lila's feet, as if the very foundation of her existence had cracked open to reveal something entirely new, something she had never dared to dream of. Hope. His voice was deep, steady, filled with a force that sent shivers down her spine, not from fear, but from something else, something unfamiliar yet intoxicating. For years, she had lived in a world where cruelty was the only language spoken to her, where love was a myth, where kindness was a fleeting illusion that disappeared the moment she reached for it. But here he was, the most powerful, ruthless billionaire in the country, a man feared by many, standing before her, making a vow that shook her very soul. "I will punish them for every tear they made you shed, and from now on, you will live like a princess, Lila." The words echoed in her mind over and over, as if she couldn't quite believe them, as if her heart refused to accept that anyone would ever fight for her, would ever care enough to want to erase the suffering she had endured. Her lips parted, but no words came out. What could she even say? How could she respond to something so impossible, so beyond anything she had ever imagined? Her hands trembled at her sides, her body still raw from the torment she had endured for years, her soul still chained to the horrors of her past. Was this real? Could she trust it? Could she trust him? Her entire life, she had been taught that she was nothing, that she was worthless, that no one would ever love her, no one would ever protect her. And yet, Victor stood there, his dark, stormy eyes locked onto hers, his entire presence radiating something dangerous, something unyielding, something that whispered of a promise that could not be broken. He was not a man who made empty threats. He was not a man who spoke without meaning every word. And that terrified her, because if he truly meant it, if he truly intended to avenge her, to give her the life she had only dreamed of, in the quiet darkness of her nights, then everything she had ever known would change. Why? The question slipped from her lips before she could stop it, her voice barely a whisper, yet it carried all the weight of her shattered heart, all the doubt, all the fear, all the wounds that had been carved into her soul by the hands of those who were supposed to love her. "Why would you do that for me?" Victor's expression didn't waver. If anything, his gaze darkened, his entire being hardening, as if her question itself had ignited something deep within him, something fierce, something unbreakable. He took a step closer, his towering frame overwhelming yet not suffocating, his presence powerful yet not oppressive. "Because no one," he said, his voice low, firm, filled with an undeniable certainty, "no one will ever hurt what belongs to me." The breath caught in her throat. "Belongs to me." The word sent a shockwave through her body, her heart slamming against her ribs, her mind spiraling into chaos. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? "Did he mean you are mine now, Lila?" he continued, his voice like a vow, an unshakable declaration that left no room for argument. "And I protect what's mine." She had never belonged to anyone before, not in a way that meant safety Mendes, not in a way that meant care. She had only ever been an object, a burden, a shadow that existed in the background of other people's lives. But the way he said it, the way he claimed her, was different. It wasn't a prison. It wasn't a trap. It was a shield, a promise, a force of nature that nothing could break. Her breath trembled as she looked up at him, searching his face for deception, for cruelty, for anything that would tell her this was just another trick, another game, another way to break her. But she found nothing, only steel, only certainty, only a man who had already decided that she was his to protect, his to cherish, his to fight for. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said, softer this time, his hand reaching out, hesitant for the first time, as if he was waiting for her permission. No one had ever waited for her permission before. No one had ever treated her as if her choice mattered. The realization made her throat tighten, made her eyes burn, made her entire body tremble with something she couldn't name. Slowly, cautiously, she let him touch her. His fingers brushed against hers, warm, firm, grounding. A gasp escaped her lips at the simple contact, because it wasn't just a touch, it was an anchor, pulling her away from the darkness, pulling her into something new, something terrifying, something that felt like hope. "I will make them pay," Victor said, his voice filled with a fury so intense it sent a shiver down her spine. "Every single one of them. They will regret every moment they made you suffer. They will beg for mercy, and I will give them none. And you, Lila, you will never shed another tear for them. You will never feel pain at their hands again. From this moment on, your life is mine to protect, and I will make sure you never suffer again." Her heart ached not from pain, not from fear, but from something so overwhelming, so consuming, that she didn't know how to contain it. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever looked at her like this, like she was worth fighting for, like she was worth something. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were something else, something foreign, something that felt dangerously close to relief. "You mean it?" she whispered, barely able to believe it, barely able to process the weight of what he was offering. "Yes," Victor said, without hesitation, without doubt. "I swear it, Lila. You are mine now, and no one will ever hurt you again." The walls she had built around her heart trembled. The chains that had bound her for so long cracked, and for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. That night, as the world outside faded into silence, Victor did not rush, did not demand, did not claim her like a ruthless man taking possession of something he had bought. No, he was different. He was careful, tender, as if he knew she had spent her entire life being hurt, as if he understood that every touch she had ever known had been cruel, unkind, and meant to break her. Lila had prepared herself for anything, had expected coldness, force, or indifference, because that was what life had taught her to expect. But when Victor reached for her, his touch was something else entirely. It was warm, steady, and filled with something she couldn't quite name. His fingers brushed against her cheek, slow, deliberate, tracing the delicate curve of her face, as if memorizing her, as if trying to make her understand that he saw her, truly saw her, not as an object, not as something disposable, but as a person, as someone worthy of tenderness. She trembled beneath his gaze, her body tense, her mind screaming at her to guard herself, to prepare for pain. But Victor did not move any closer, did not demand anything. He simply looked at her, his dark, piercing eyes filled with something raw, something that made her heart pound in her chest. "You don't have to be afraid," he murmured, his voice low, soothing, as if trying to erase every painful memory that had been carved into her soul. "I will never hurt you, Lila, not now, not ever." The words sent a shiver through her, not because she didn't believe him, but because she wanted to believe him too much, and that terrified her. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever given her a choice. She had spent her entire life in the shadows, treated as nothing more than a burden, a servant, something to be used and discarded. But Victor was different. He did not touch her with entitlement. He did not look at her like she was something he had bought. He looked at her like she was precious, like she mattered, like he would rather die than let her be hurt again. Her throat tightened, her hands gripping the soft fabric of the sheets beneath her as she fought against the overwhelming emotions rising inside her. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her eyes searching his for answers. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Victor exhaled slowly, his thumb brushing against her cheek with an unbearable gentleness, his touch sending warmth spreading through her body. "Because you deserve kindness," he said simply, as if it were the most obvious truth in the world. "You have spent your life in pain, in fear, thinking that no one would ever love you. But that ends tonight. From today, you are mine, and I will cherish you forever." The words sent a shockwave through her, shaking her to her very core, because no one had ever claimed her in such a way, not with force, not with cruelty, but with devotion, with a promise that sounded unbreakable. She had never belonged to anyone before, not in a way that meant protection, safety, love. But the way he said it, the way he held her, as if she was something delicate, something he would fight the entire world to protect, made her heart ache in a way she couldn't explain. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to see the man beneath the title, beneath the ruthless billionaire the world feared. He was strong, powerful, dangerous, but with her, he was something else, gentle, patient, willing to wait for her to trust him, to believe in the promise he had just made. And that scared her, because if he was telling the truth, if he truly meant what he said, then everything she had ever known would change. For the first time in her life, she had a choice. And for the first time, she chose to trust. Her hands trembled as she reached up, hesitantly, uncertainly, until her fingers brushed against his chest, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of his heart beneath her touch. Victor stilled, his breath catching slightly, as if her touch meant more to him than she could ever understand. "Lila," he murmured, his voice softer now, almost reverent. "It's okay. You don't have to say anything. Just let me hold you." She swallowed hard, the lump in her throat nearly unbearable, but she nodded, barely able to find her voice. "Okay." It was just one word, but it was everything. Victor didn't hesitate. He moved slowly, carefully, wrapping his arms around her and pulling her against his chest, holding her close, as if shielding her from the entire world. His warmth surrounded her, his scent clean, masculine, intoxicating, filling her senses, making her feel safe in a way she had never known. And for the first time in her life, she felt something she had never dared to hope for. She felt loved. Her body relaxed against his, her head resting against his chest as his arms tightened around her, as if he could hold her together, piece by broken piece. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. His actions said everything. He was here, he was real, and he wasn't going anywhere. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with something unspoken, something powerful, something that wrapped around them like a shield against the past, against the pain, against everything that had ever tried to break her. Lila closed her eyes, allowing herself to sink into the warmth of his embrace, allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was no longer alone. "Sleep," he whispered against her hair, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "You're safe now." And for the first time in years, Lila believed it. She let herself rest, let herself trust, let herself hope, because Victor had promised to cherish her, and deep in her heart, she knew he would keep that promise. The next morning, as the golden sunlight streamed through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, warming the luxurious silk sheets wrapped around her, Lila slowly stirred, her body sinking into the softest mattress she had ever felt. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure she was, her mind still trapped in the memories of the small, cold, uncomfortable bed she had always been forced to sleep in back at Margot's house, where every morning greeted her with the harsh reality of servitude. But as her lashes fluttered open, revealing the breathtaking sight before her, she gasped, her heart pounding as she sat up in shock. The bedroom was nothing like anything she had ever seen, let alone imagined belonging to her. The walls were adorned with elegant gold and ivory accents, shimmering under the sunlight, and a massive crystal chandelier hung from the high ceiling, reflecting dazzling rays of light across the room like tiny dancing stars. The bed itself was fit for royalty, an enormous, king-sized masterpiece, draped in plush, embroidered bedding, the softest fabric caressing her skin. To her right, an entire wall of glass windows overlooked a breathtaking view of a private garden, lush with vibrant flowers and a sparkling fountain at its center, as if taken straight from a fairy tale. But what truly left her breathless was what awaited her beyond the bed. At the foot of the luxurious mattress, an array of exquisite dresses was neatly displayed, gowns of the finest silk, satin, and chiffon in every shade imaginable, their delicate embellishments glistening under the light. Beside them, perfectly arranged on a velvet-covered table, lay dazzling diamond necklaces, golden bracelets, sapphire-studded rings, and accessories so breathtakingly beautiful. They looked like they belonged to a queen. Lila's lips parted in disbelief as she slowly swung her legs over the edge of the bed, her bare feet sinking into the plush, soft carpet below. Her hands trembled as she reached out to touch one of the gowns, a deep red, off-the-shoulder masterpiece adorned with intricate beading that shimmered like a river of rubies. Never in her life had she dared to dream of such luxury. Never had she even imagined wearing something so divine. And yet, here it all was, waiting for her. A rush of emotions swelled inside her: disbelief, awe, confusion. Why? Why had Victor done this for her? What had she done to deserve such a life, after years of being treated like nothing more than an unwanted servant? Before she could even begin to make sense of it all, the sound of the grand double doors opening drew her attention, and there, standing before her, was Victor himself, exuding effortless power and confidence in a crisp black suit tailored to perfection. His sharp, captivating gaze softened the moment it landed on her, and a small, knowing smile curved his lips as he watched her expression. "You're awake," he said smoothly, stepping closer, his towering frame making the already grand room feel even smaller. Lila swallowed hard, still overwhelmed, her voice barely above a whisper as she spoke. "Victor, what is all this?" Her hands gestured toward the lavish gifts, her wide eyes filled with wonder and hesitation, unable to comprehend that this was real. Victor's smirk deepened as he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, elegantly wrapped box. "A surprise," he said simply, holding it out to her. "And there's more." Lila hesitated before carefully accepting the box, her fingers shaking slightly as she unwrapped it. The moment the lid was lifted, her breath hitched. A stunning, diamond-encrusted key rested inside, gleaming under the light. Confusion flickered in her gaze as she looked up at Victor, searching for answers. His smirk turned into a full-blown, satisfied smile as he leaned in slightly, his deep voice washing over her like a warm embrace. "It's the key to your new home," he murmured. "A princess needs her castle, don't you think?" Lila's heart nearly stopped. Her new home? Castle? Her lips parted in shock, her mind struggling to process his words. But before she could even formulate a response, Victor extended his hand toward her. "Come," he said, his tone both gentle and commanding. "Let me show you." Still in disbelief, Lila took his hand, allowing him to guide her through the grand estate. Every step she took felt surreal, as if she were walking through a dream, but nothing could have prepared her for what awaited outside. The moment the front doors opened, her breath was stolen from her lungs. Before her stood a mansion so magnificent it could rival any royal palace built with the finest architecture. Adorned with marble columns, golden accents, and intricate details that exuded opulence, the estate stretched across acres of lush, beautifully landscaped grounds, complete with grand fountains, private gardens, and a shimmering infinity pool overlooking the rolling hills beyond. Her throat tightened, tears welling in her eyes as she turned to Victor, her voice trembling. This is mine?" Victor's gaze softened as he cupped her cheek, his touch warm, reassuring. "Yes, Lila. Everything you see, everything you touch, it's all yours now. You will never have to suffer again. You will never have to live in fear, or be treated as less than what you are." His thumb brushed away the single tear that escaped down her cheek. "You are precious. You are mine. And I will make sure you live like the queen you were always meant to be." Lila's chest ached with emotions too vast to contain gratitude, disbelief, an unfamiliar yet intoxicating feeling of being cherished. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just existing, she was living. And as she stood there, staring at the paradise that was now hers, she realized one undeniable truth. Victor had not just given her luxury, he had given her freedom. He had given her a new life. And perhaps, just perhaps, he had given her the chance to finally believe in love. As the days turned into weeks, Lila found herself experiencing a life she had never known before, one filled with warmth, care, and a sense of security that was so foreign to her that she often wondered if it was all just a fleeting dream. She had spent years believing that love was nothing more than a cruel illusion, something meant for others but never for her. And yet, here she was, living in a world that felt like a fairy tale, all because of Victor Stone, the man who had once been known for his ruthless nature, but who, in her presence, was nothing short of tender, protective, and endlessly giving. Every morning, she awoke in the vast, silk-laden bed of her luxurious estate, her heart racing at the realization that she was no longer bound by suffering. Instead of being jolted awake by Margot's cruel demands or the harsh reality of servitude, She was greeted by the gentle warmth of the golden morning sun, filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the scent of fresh roses that Victor had ordered to be placed in her room every night, and the undeniable feeling of being cherished in a way she never had been before. But it was not the wealth or the luxury that began to stir her heart. It was Victor himself. The way he looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. The way he listened to her every word with such intense focus as if nothing else mattered. And the way his touch, no matter how light, no matter how fleeting, left a trail of warmth on her skin that sent shivers down her spine. At first, she had tried to guard her heart, reminding herself that men like Victor Stone did not fall in love, that she was nothing more than an unexpected twist in his life, a possession he had acquired. Slowly, hesitantly, she found herself trusting him. It was not an easy journey. Years of pain and cruelty had built walls around her heart, walls that had protected her from disappointment, from betrayal. But Victor was relentless, patient, and unwavering in his pursuit of her trust. He never forced her, never demanded anything from her except for one thing, that she allow herself to be happy. And so she did. She allowed herself to smile more, to laugh without fear of being silenced, to explore the world he had given her without the constant weight of anxiety pressing down on her shoulders. She allowed herself to look at him, not as the feared billionaire everyone else saw, but as the man who had saved her, the man who had given her a life of dignity, the man whose very presence made her feel something she had never felt before: love. But with love came fear, a deep, paralyzing fear that threatened to consume her every time she let herself imagine a future by his side. What if this was temporary? What if he changed his mind? What if she was nothing more than a passing fascination to him, a momentary distraction in his otherwise power-driven world? She knew men like Victor Stone were not meant to be tied down by emotions, that they lived their lives on their own terms, unattached and unburdened by things like love. And yet, every time she looked into his deep, piercing eyes, she saw something there, something raw, something real, something that made her heart race with hope. She tried to fight it, tried to remind herself that she was just a woman who had been thrust into his life by chance. But the truth was undeniable. She was falling for him, hard. Every stolen glance, every whispered word, every tender touch pushed her further and further over the edge, and she was powerless to stop it. She had never known what it felt like to be loved, to be wanted, not just for what she could offer, but for who she was. And Victor, in his own quiet, unyielding way, was showing her a love she had never dared to dream of. But the fear remained, lurking in the corners of her mind, whispering warnings of heartbreak, of abandonment, of the cruel reality that love was not meant for people like her. And so, even as her heart raced with every interaction, even as she found herself longing for his touch, even as she felt herself falling deeper into the abyss of love, she hesitated. Because if there was one thing she had learned in her life, it was that happiness was fragile, and love was the most dangerous thing of all. But Victor was making it impossible not to believe. The day of reckoning had finally arrived, a moment that Lila had never dared to imagine, a justice she had never expected to receive. But Victor Stone was a man who never broke his promises, especially when it came to the woman he had vowed to protect with his very soul. From the moment he had learned of the torment Lila had suffered at the hands of her cruel stepmother and wicked step-siblings, a fire of unrelenting vengeance had burned within him, and he had sworn to himself that they would pay for every tear Lila had shed, for every night she had gone to bed cold and hungry, for every moment she had spent believing she was unworthy of love, of happiness, of a life beyond servitude. Victor was not a man who acted on impulse. He was calculated, strategic, and ruthless when necessary. And when it came to his enemies, especially those who had dared to hurt the woman he cherished, he made sure their downfall was absolute. The plan had been set in motion the very moment he had taken Lila into his home, when he had gathered every piece of information about her wretched family, uncovering the full extent of their greed, corruption, and the countless skeletons they had so desperately tried to keep buried. With the immense power he wielded, Victor launched an all-out war against them, beginning with their financial empire, the very foundation upon which they had built their false sense of superiority. He orchestrated their bankruptcy with a precision that left no room for escape. Every fraudulent deal they had ever made, every stolen asset, every underhanded scheme they had profited from, was laid bare for the world to see. The media feasted on the scandal, headlines exposing their crimes flashing across every major news outlet, their names dragged through the mud until they became nothing more than a cautionary tale of greed and cruelty. But Victor was far from done. It wasn't enough to strip them of their wealth. They needed to feel the kind of suffering they had inflicted on Lila for years. He ensured that every single one of their so-called allies abandoned them, that every powerful connection they had once boasted about turned their backs in disgust, leaving them with no one to turn to, no lifeline to grasp. Their lavish home was seized, their bank accounts frozen, and their businesses shut down overnight, leaving them in financial ruin, with nothing but the clothes on their backs. And then came the final blow, their social downfall. The same high society they had once looked down upon Lila from now treated them like parasites, whispering in hushed tones about their disgrace, mocking them for the very poverty they had once condemned others for. Margot, once a woman who had basked in power and control, was reduced to a desperate, broken shell of herself, her once manicured hands trembling as she begged for mercy, her pride shattered as she realized there was no one left to save her. Ethan and Sophie, who had spent their lives reveling in privilege, now found themselves struggling to afford even the basic necessities, their friends abandoning them as if they carried a contagious disease. But the cruelest twist was that Lila was now living a life they could only dream of, loved and cherished by a man who had the power to destroy them with a mere whisper. And he had done it all for her. When Lila learned of everything Victor had done, when she saw the lengths to which he had gone to ensure that those who had hurt her would never rise again, she was overwhelmed with emotions too vast to contain. No one, not a single person in her life, had ever fought for her before, had ever sought justice for the pain she had endured. She had spent so many years believing that she was alone in the world, that no one would ever stand by her side. And yet, here he was, a man who had every luxury at his disposal, every beautiful woman at his feet, choosing her, defending her, loving her. The realization struck her like lightning. Victor Stone, the feared billionaire, the man the world whispered about in awe and terror, had done all of this not out of duty, not out of obligation, but because he loved her, because her pain was his pain, her suffering was his suffering, and he would burn the world down before he let anyone lay another hand on her. As she stood before him, her heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief and undeniable love, Victor reached for her, his strong arms pulling her into his embrace, his voice low and fierce as he whispered, "No one will ever hurt you again, Lila, not while I'm alive." And in that moment, as she buried her face against his chest, as his warmth surrounded her like a shield against the darkness of her past, she knew this was love, true, unwavering, undeniable love. And she would never let it go. The night was unlike any other, a night woven from the fabric of dreams, where the stars shimmered like scattered diamonds across the velvety sky, and the ocean waves whispered secrets of love against the shore, carrying with them the melody of a future filled with passion, devotion, and eternal togetherness. Lila had no idea what Victor had planned, no clue why he had insisted on blindfolding her as they stepped onto his private jet, his deep, commanding voice murmuring assurances in her ear that tonight would be unforgettable. Her heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation, her fingers trembling slightly as they clung to his strong arm. His presence, a steady anchor in the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to consume her. She had never known a love like this, a love that was fierce, yet tender, protective, yet freeing, a love that had taken her from the depths of despair and raised her to heights she had never dared to dream of reaching. Victor Stone was a man who had redefined her existence, a man who had shown her that she was not just someone to be used and discarded, but someone to be cherished, adored, and worshipped as the queen of his world. And as the jet finally landed, as he carefully led her onto a boat with the blindfold still securely in place, she couldn't help but feel a sense of overwhelming gratitude, knowing that whatever awaited her on the other side of this journey would be nothing short of extraordinary. The scent of salt and exotic flowers filled the air, the sound of waves lapping against the shore growing louder. And then, finally, Victor's voice, rich and filled with something deeper than she could place, murmured against her ear, "Open your eyes, my love." And when she did, her breath caught, her heart nearly stopping at the sheer beauty before her. A private island stretched out before them, untouched, pristine, bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun. The sand was softer than silk beneath her feet, the air carrying the faintest scent of roses and jasmine. But what truly stole her breath was the sight ahead, a pathway lined with thousands upon thousands of candles, leading towards a stunningly set table beneath a canopy of fairy lights, where an exquisite candlelit dinner awaited. The soft strains of violin music played in the background, blending seamlessly with the sound of the ocean, creating an atmosphere so breathtakingly romantic that Lila felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. She turned to Victor, her voice barely a whisper. This is for me?" The answer was in his eyes, in the way he looked at her as if she were the only woman in the world, as if she were the very reason the stars existed. "Everything I do is for you, Lila," he said softly, taking her hands and leading her forward, guiding her down the candlelit path with a patience and reverence that made her heart swell with uncontainable love. Dinner was a dream, a feast fit for royalty, the finest delicacies prepared by world-class chefs, each dish more exquisite than the last, each bite a testament to the lengths Victor would go to ensure her happiness. But despite the perfection of the evening, despite the beauty of the island, the luxury surrounding her, the real magic was in the way he looked at her, the way he reached across the table to tuck a stray curl behind her ear, the way his fingers lingered against her skin, as if he couldn't bear to be apart from her for even a second. And then, just as the last rays of sunlight dipped beneath the horizon, bathing the sky in hues of pink and gold, Victor stood, his movements slow, deliberate, his gaze never leaving hers as he walked around the table. And then, to her utter shock, he lowered himself onto one knee. A gasp escaped Lila's lips, her hands flying to her mouth, her entire body freezing as she watched him reach into his pocket and pull out a velvet box, flipping it open to reveal the most breathtaking diamond ring she had ever seen, large yet elegant, dazzling yet timeless, a reflection of the love they shared. Her heartbeat roared in her ears, her vision blurring with unshed tears, and then Victor's voice, steady yet thick with emotion, broke through the haze. Every word a promise, every syllable a vow. "Lila, from the moment I met you, my life changed forever. You showed me a love I never knew I was capable of, a love so deep, so consuming, that I can no longer imagine a future without you. You are my strength, my heart, my soul. I want to spend every single day proving to you how much you mean to me, cherishing you, protecting you, loving you with every breath in my body. So, my love, my queen, will you marry me?" A sob escaped her lips, her entire body trembling as she stared at the man before her, this man who had once been a feared, untouchable billionaire, now kneeling before her with nothing but raw, unfiltered love in his eyes, offering her his heart, his future, his everything. And in that moment, there was no doubt, no hesitation, no fear, only love, only the overwhelming certainty that this was where she belonged, in his arms, by his side, forever. "Yes," she choked out, her voice thick with tears, a watery smile breaking across her face as she fell to her knees, throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes, Victor, 1,000 times yes." The relief, the joy in his eyes as he slid the ring onto her finger was indescribable. And then, before she could even take another breath, his lips were on hers, claiming her in a kiss so deep, so passionate, so filled with unspoken promises that had left her completely breathless. The world melted away the ocean,